Alright, so this is really different for everybody. I know probably teaching remotely and learning remotely from home is a lot different than learning in the class and teaching from the classroom, but we just gotta roll up the punches and do what we can with the situation that we're placed in. So first and foremost, hopefully everybody is doing really well. You're staying safe with your family and your friends, and you're keeping in touch with other people, trying to keep sane. I know cabin fever is real. I definitely want to go out and exercise, but for the safety of everybody, remember just to stay home if you don't need anything essential, and also keep your distance from everybody else. I know it's tough sometimes, especially with younger siblings. They all want to come up to you with their dirty hands and probably poke you or annoy you, but try to keep your distance as much as possible. So going back to the assignment, basically the battles of World War One. This research project was where we left off on last time we were in class. And I know some of you still haven't turned in this project, so just turn it into me as soon as you can. Um, we went over 3 battles together. The first one was the Battle of Tannenberg. Remember, it was in August of 1914. I know it was between Germany and Russia. Remember, Germany and the Central Powers had to fight on 2 fronts, the Western Front and the Eastern Front. This battle was important because it set the tone for Germany and also Russia during World War One. Russia, basically, they were huge, but they didn't provide much resistance. They just had a lot of people. If you look at the troops, Russia had 40,000 more people, but they lost 100,000 more than 100,000 than Germany. They were ill-equipped and they weren't that strong. Remember, they industrialized really late in comparison to other industrialized countries, and at the time they're going through a political crisis. This is actually what caused them to exit the war in 1917, but that'll be our next unit, the Russian Revolution. The second battle is the First Battle of Marne, which was a week after the Battle of Tannenberg, and it was between France and Great Britain versus Germany. The importance of this battle was that it set the tone for the Western Front. This is where trenches were first dug, and this sets the tone because if you remember, there's a lot of stalemate on the Western Front, and it all started from this battle. There are still a lot of casualties, but not too much movement. And then the last one is the Battle of Somme. So this battle, there was no real winner, but it did show the destruction of war, especially total war. Remember, all countries invested all resources into battle, and this is where we see the destruction that could come from it. Remember, trench warfare was used as well. And if you look at the casualties, 623,000 on the left side and 500,000 for Germany. This battle was one of the most deadly battles ever. And if you look at the outcomes, the Allies only gained 7 miles of territory, which is pretty small if you think about it. Also at the battle, it was where tanks were first used. Remember, there's no guns, no bombs, nothing that can shoot bombs, from the tank. This was just used to transport people over terrain. Remember the tide turns reading? Hopefully you did this. They'll give you a lot of background information into basically the US joining the war all the way till the end of the war. And then what new technology was used in 1915? It was not the tanks, it was the submarines, the U-boats, especially used by the Germans. And I remember when war started, the US was neutral. Even though they were neutral, they were sending material still to these big powers in the war to make a little bit of money They also mobilized their people and factories to create weapons for war and war materials. So, two reasons that the US joined the war. The first one is the sinking of the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a British ship and it was supposed to be for civilians. So on the ship we had 2,000 people, and out of those 2,000, 159 were Americans. A German U-boat actually sunk the Lusitania on May 7th, 1915, and if you look at the amount of people that died on the ship, there were 1,200, and out of those 1,200, 128 were Americans. So it's debatable if President Wilson would have deemed this as important in joining the war if Americans were not part of the ship, but since there were American civilians on the ship, it was alarming for him. And then Germany defended its action by claiming the Lusitania was in war zone, but this was a little contradictory because Germany and their submarines were already sinking any ships that they saw that weren't theirs. And that started in February. So this happened in May, then February, the German submarines were already going back to unrestricted submarine warfare, which meant that they were sinking any ships that they saw. The second reason why the US joined the war was the Zimmermann Note or telegram. Basically, it was a telegram sent by German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann to Mexico. And it was Germany's plan to take out the US before the US joined the war. Germany wanted to create an alliance with Mexico. Remember, Germany's really far away from the US, so it wouldn't make sense to send people over to the US to attack. They thought sending this telegram to Mexico, having Mexico attack the US, would be a lot more convenient. The reason behind this note was to give basically Mexico back territories that the US gained in the Mexican-American War in 1849, territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. They thought it might entice Mexico to attack and take back what was theirs. It was intercepted by the British, and this, along with the sinking of the Lusitania, were the two last straws that led the US into World War I. So remember propaganda, I was going to go over this if we were still at school, but since we're not, we're going to move on. Here's a little Trump propaganda poster, making America great again. He looks a little too white though, should be a little more orange. Here are some total war posters, rationing, and everybody working in factories. Here are recruitment posters. And then propaganda posters from the Americans. Got a white American woman being carried by this German brute. You can tell that he's German by his pointed cap over there. There's also a German poster. And we're going to move on to the Treaty of Versailles. So when you did the reading, the tide turns, you would get a lot of the same information I'm going to be talking about now. The first thing is when the US joined the war, remember it was 3 years after the battle was already started. So a lot of people were tired, they were disgusted, they were probably traumatized by a lot of horrors that they saw in war. US soldiers that came into the war, they were fresh, they had the right mindset, and they brought with them a lot of new resources, and they boosted the morals of the Allied powers. One big battle, actually the last big push by the Germans in World War I, was the Second Battle of Marne in July 1918. So remember, America enters on the Allied side, and Germany was still trying to get into Paris, into France. So the Second Battle of Marne actually pushed the Germans back across France and Belgium and back into Germany. So it was really significant because there was little German influence left in France because of this battle. And then on November 9th, 1918, with a lot more losses that were brought on by fresh American troops, the German Kaiser William II steps down. He basically retires, and a German Republic was proclaimed. So remember, Republic means that the people have the power to vote for who they want to be their leaders. And the German people did not actually agree to this. They were just forced to become a republic. So of course they won't be happy, as we'll see going forward. And then on November 11th, 2 days later, the Germans signed an armistice, basically an agreement to stop fighting. Sorry about that. And here comes some ideas for peace. You did this assignment last week. I was analyzing President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. And these 14 points were trying to keep peace throughout the world. Some key ideas were freedom of the seas, so no submarine attacks, removal of international trade barriers so that the economies can flow and function a lot better, reduction in arms, anti-secret alliances, adjustment of European boundaries according to nationality. And you see that the Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary actually gets split up after World War I. Not because of Wilson's 14 points, but from a lot of the other treaties that were passed. He went to create the League of Nations. So the League of Nations is like the UN today. In short, they're like a body with representatives from different countries, and instead of going to battle, the League of Nations job was to stop fights before they happen. It was to have countries basically talk to each other and come to peace through politics. So let's continue. We got the Paris Peace Conference, and this was in January 1919. There were 27 representatives, or there were 27 nations there, and they sent representatives. So there was, if you look here, no one from the Central Powers or Russia. So if you think about it, and you think about probably the terms that were agreed upon, it probably did not favor the Central Powers or Russia. And then there are 5 big treaties that were signed. The biggest one was the Treaty of Versailles. And then the decisions are made by the Big Four. The Big Four were basically the leaders from the biggest countries that were on the Allied powers. So you got President Woodrow Wilson from the US, Prime Minister David Lloyd George for Great Britain, and then we got Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando for Italy, and Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau for France. So if we were in class, I'd have done this Paris Peace Conference Treaty of Versailles assignment where you would have been in groups of 3s, and you would have had basically a cheat sheet, and you would have been assigned one of 3 people from the big 3, either France, Great Britain, or the US, and you would have had to come up with what your leader would have believed in terms of the treaty, and also discuss with your other members of your classmates to come to an agreement for the treaty. But since we are not in class, we'll skip over this and we'll move on to the Treaty of Versailles DBQ. So the Treaty of Versailles DBQ, I know it was pretty challenging for some of you, maybe some of you a little more easy. But these documents, they are intended to help you answer this question: was the Treaty of Versailles a good settlement to ensure the peace and help Europe recover from the war? So document 1 is from President Wilson's 14 points. You got 3 points from there. Document 2 is Wilson's speech to Congress. And then we got document 3, which is this economist, John Maynard Keynes, him talking about what would happen in Russia. No, not in Russia, but in Europe. We have a little bit of information from Georges Clemenceau, David Lloyd George. And here's a little cartoon. These two graphs are really important because we see what happened to an economy, especially of Germany. So following the war, you see there's huge inflations from Germany because they started to print a lot of money to try to fix this issue. But it did not fix the issue because you see items costing a lot more than usual. Whereas other countries, they're doing pretty good. And then here's debt after the war. See pictures of Germans and their marks or their form of currency. That's money right there. And then these points or articles were from the Treaty of Versailles. So number 14, remember you have to corroborate. You got to put all these documents starting from document 1 in either the left or right side. Remember the left side is supports the Treaty of Versailles, and on the right side it is against the Treaty of Versailles. So let's move on to number 15. Number 15 is where you have to actually start writing paragraphs. So let's get out of this. Let's go to the Treaty of Versailles DBQ questions. So number 15, on Google Docs, create a 3-paragraph essay answering the question, was the Treaty of Versailles a good settlement to ensure the peace and help Europe recover from the war? You will need an introduction paragraph with a thesis/argument and the use of at least 3 documents from the DBQ packet that is sourced correctly. So I'll be posting this on Schoology today, and your 3 paragraphs will be due Friday by 8 p.m. So this should help give you an outline of the 3 paragraphs. Let me go over it. So the task: write a 3-paragraph essay, introduction, 2 body paragraphs to answer the question. I don't need to say it again, I said it a few times. So utilize at least, let's change this to 3 pieces of evidence that is sourced correctly. So the introduction, I gave you an introduction example. Some of you do not need to use this, but I know that some of you this might be helpful. So if you need this, you could use it. If you don't need this, then don't use it. Create your own introduction. And I know who actually needs to use this and who doesn't need to use this. So if you don't need to use this, don't use it. I'll make you redo the introduction if you use my sample, but you don't actually need it. So the introduction, remember you need a hook, which is a catchy first sentence about the topic, or it could be like a question, a phrase, a comment, just something interesting to get the reader's attention. And then we need some background information. It would be sentence 2 to 4, or it could be more. I put a lot more to be a little more comprehensive, to provide a lot more context behind what I'm talking about. And then 5 is the thesis. Remember, your thesis is the argument sentence that answers the question that you're trying to answer, which is this one. So introduction example 1, my hook. Did you know Hitler's rise to power started with the Treaty of Versailles? And then my background, World War I lasted between 1914 to 1918 and brought together the world as it involved the Allied powers against the Central powers. The Allied powers consisted of Great Britain, France, and the US, while the Central Powers mainly consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. The Allied powers ended up winning the war, and the leaders of the main winning countries, called the Big Three, came to the peace terms during the Paris Peace Conference. The US President Woodrow Wilson presented his 14 points to try and maintain peace. However, the other leaders like Great Britain's Lloyd George and Francis Clemenceau had other ideas. Together, the leaders of the 27 winning countries agreed to 5 total peace treaties. The biggest peace treaty was the Treaty of Versailles. And then here's your thesis. I believe that the Treaty of Versailles was not, so you have to choose. Do you think it was, or do you think it was not, a great settlement to ensure peace and recovery after the war because? And you give me your 2 arguments. So paragraph 2 will be argument 1. Paragraph 3 will be argument 2. So argument 1, here in your thesis, that'll be your paragraph 2. And then argument 2 in your thesis, that'll be your paragraph 3. So in your body paragraphs, this is what you need. We need a topic sentence. So a sentence that tells me what you'll be talking about this paragraph. For example, if your first argument was that it punished Germany, your topic sentence would be, I believe that the Treaty of Versailles was a good settlement to ensure peace and recovery because it punished Germany for the war. Something along those lines. And then background information leading to the use of evidence. You gotta give me some more context as to what you're talking about. When you're saying that it punished Germany, for example, if I use that, then you gotta give me a little bit of background information by saying what in the treaty punished Germany and why they deserve to be punished. Maybe you could talk about them sinking the Lusitania or killing innocent civilian lives, something along those lines. And then the third part is citing it and use of sources. Remember, you have to introduce it, tell me where you got the document, plus quotations around the quote. And I gave you a little example here. Based on the evidence from document B titled Cats and Rats, it states that, and give me the quote. And then the last part is the analysis. So this is where you bring in your own opinions and you tell me why you chose your quote. How does your quote support your argument overall? So this quote shows that. This quote tells us that. And you just explain. Okay. And then for onto the rubric, I know this is quite long. So the rubric, I'll be grading you on 4 categories. First one is a thesis statement. And your thesis should be okay. I gave you a little example here. You just got to give me your arguments. And then analysis and supporting information. This is basically the background information that you use, but also the evidence that you bring in as well from the DBQ documents. Remember, you need at least 3. And your evidence should back up your argument. Organization. Remember, we need introduction paragraph with the thesis, and we need 2 body paragraphs. And then sentence structure, grammar, mechanics, and spelling. Basically, just check over your essay once you're done to make sure nothing is missing, everything makes sense, there's no run-on sentences. And just make sure you spell words correctly and also capitalize words that needs to be capitalized. Okay, remember, type this on Google Docs. It'll be due on Friday at 8 p.m. and share with me by then. If you don't know how to share, it would basically be clicking this share button and typing in my email. Message me if you have any other questions. I know this is quite long. Hopefully it's helpful and you understand where we're going with this class. And hopefully you didn't miss my voice that much. I know it's only been a week, but hopefully you're staying safe, and we'll probably continue with this format going forward. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.